Hello, and welcome to The Joy of CX. I'm David Cox, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about how to go about constructing a truly unique, differentiated, branded customer experience that really makes an emotional connection with our customers. We talked in the last episode about how to go about getting rid of the things that get in the way, all of those blocks that prevent customers from feeling positive towards a company. You know, it's the equivalent of learning that we shouldn't be leaving our wet towels on the floor, leaving the top off the toothpaste tube, or loading the dishwasher all wrong. And whilst it's absolutely vital to focus on these things, to get rid of the things that get in the way, just doing this won't go any way to creating a positive relationship with customers. You're never going to fall in love with somebody just because they don't leave their wet towels on the floor. You fall in love with somebody because they have an intrinsic quality, a set of values and essence that you really connect with at a deeper level. So what we're going to be doing today is talking about how to go about creating that deeper connection. What it takes to build a branded experience that will make that connection, that will be something that your customers will fall in love with. I recognize that this starts to stray into what a lot of people think of as a kind of marketing smoke and mirrors. The world of the brand promise that's not really grounded in reality, sort of esoteric fluff that isn't really the essence of an organization. But to me, this could not be further from the truth. In my experience, having a very deliberate sense of who you are and what you stand for is not fluffy BS. It's the critical foundation on which you build everything. So it's essential to get this right. And again, what I've learned over the years is that there is a straightforward process you can go through which will enable you to create something that is concrete, tangible and real. Something that will form the backbone of your operations and will be something that not only customers will fall in love with, but will also energize your people as well. It will create a common sense of purpose that will connect your people with your business and your business with your customers. So let's get into the process of putting this into practice. The first and very obvious point, but one that does need making again, is that it all starts with a deep understanding of what matters to your target customers. And there's a couple of key points in that phrase. The first is that word matters, because we're not trying to understand what customers want from us. This isn't an exercise in understanding what we should improve and what their expectations are. This is trying to go one level deeper than that into what drives our customers at a human level. This is about the heart, not the head. In the last episode, we talked about all the things we need to do to deliver against customer expectations. That's all about the head. This is now about the heart. So we need to understand what matters to them, what touches them at an emotional level. The second thing is to talk about target customers. We have to have a clear picture of who we are building our differentiated experience for. How can we tune our experience to what matters to customers unless we know who they are? Otherwise, if we're trying to be all things to all customers, we'll end up being nothing. So unless we target a particular segment of customers as our absolute core, we'll never really be able to build a differentiated experience that will appeal to them. This, of course, doesn't mean that those are the only customers that we want and that we're building barriers to other segments. It's simply a question of focus and clarity. Targeting high-end customers, for example, requires an entirely different approach to focusing in on the base of the pyramid because they value different aspects. So, the exam question is, what matters to your target customers? And I'll be very honest, almost every organization I've gone into believes they know the answer to that because they believe that they know what customers want. They've been doing their surveys and so on. They've got very clear what customers want, but not necessarily what truly matters to them, what they really value. So the first issue we have to deal with here is that if we're embarking on a transformation towards true customer centricity, the first key lesson is humility, not believing you already know what customers think, but being humble enough to go out and ask them. It's something I recommend to every single client that I work with and very often have to fight with them about. The very first step is always to go out and talk to customers to really understand what matters to them. And this follows a fairly standard approach, a standard methodology that's not only enormously effective, but also mercifully quite cheap and easy to do. It's based around running a short series of focus groups with people who represent your target customers, as well as possibly some adjacent segments if required. And the objective of these focus groups is to understand, direct from customers, what great would look like from their perspective. What would be the ideal experience for a company in your sector? It's important to note here, we're not running these groups as us as a company and talking to our customers. We're talking to the market on an anonymous basis. So we're not trying to research ourselves, what our customers think about us and what we need to improve. We're trying to get a vision of what they would love to see from us as a company in the sector. So in terms of the discussion guide for the focus groups, I typically start with some kind of warm-up, get them to talk about brands they love and sentiments that those brands engender in them. And then it's straight into the meat of the session, where you simply ask customers to describe to you what the ideal company in your sector, your industry would look like. We need to steer them away from the natural tendency of talking about what needs to be improved and encourage them to imagine their vision of a great or ideal company. There's all sorts of techniques you can use here, from the wild and wacky of expressing their creative ideas in collages and so on, to the more straightforward of asking them to imagine they were the CEO of a brand new company in the market and getting them to describe what their new company would look like, what it would do, how it would relate to customers and so on. I found it's important to give lots of freedom to respond and not to be too guided here, because it's as much about what people choose to talk about as it is about the ideas they come up with. So when people start talking, they'll usually talk about a mix of all sorts of different things, from the very functional, they've got to have good customer service, be good value for money, all these kinds of things. But also they'll tend to start to talk about the more emotional things. They need to treat their customers with respect, give them freedom to choose what's right for them, and so on. And just to give you an example of this, I was doing this research with a mobile operator in the Middle East, and they were talking about the ideal experience of walking into a store. And I remember this one lady, she was a local lady living in quite a multicultural environment, and was trying to express the way she wanted to be treated. And she kind of stopped and then just said, you know what, in the end, style is everything. And in this phrase, she just captured the essence of what was important to her. It encapsulated the subtleties of language, of manners, of deference, and so on. There was an intrinsic aspect to every interaction that needed to embody what she could recognize as style. And the interesting thing is that when I fed this back to the local management of the business, they immediately recognized exactly what this customer was talking about. They understood it at a gut level, at a cultural level. But even more interestingly, even though they got it straight away, it was not something they had ever really thought about. Serving customers had always been about efficiency, process, about frictionless interactions. And now they were starting to recognize that how they serve customers was actually more important to them than just getting the job done. I think what this also speaks to is something I've learned over the years of running this kind of research. And that is to encourage the senior management of the organization to come and sit and watch customers talk in the focus group sessions. It's one thing to see the output of the research crystallized and summarized in PowerPoint presentations, but hearing customers express themselves is a totally different thing. Senior managers often become utterly used to running their business. They believe they know everything they think they need to know about their business. And when you give them the opportunity to sit and hear customers talk, there are a couple of things that can be real eye-openers. The first thing is what they actually talk about, and obviously, conversely, what they don't talk about. You'll always get some surprises around the things that people say are important to them. As an example, I remember watching some focus groups we did for a mobile operator in Brazil, and specifically in Rio de Janeiro. And the only thing they wanted to talk about was how the operator responded when your phone was stolen. In that particular city, it was such a regular occurrence that insurance and quick replacement was absolutely top of mind. I have to say, I've never seen that anywhere else. The second thing that's really interesting is how people express themselves, the language they use, how they refer to things. Telecoms operators, for example, are often obsessed with gigabytes and plan names. But you find that customers don't refer to those things at all. They usually have no idea what a gigabyte even is, and we'll talk about plans only really in terms of the price. I've got a $50 plan or a $20 plan, rather than the fancy name that you came up with. So you get this juxtaposition between what you as a business thought was important and what customers are actually talking about and saying and what language they use. So if you can get your senior management people to sit and listen to the way customers express themselves, you'll get a first step on that journey to start to change the way they look at the world and start to see the world again from the outside in perspective of customers rather than their familiar perspective from inside the business. So with these focus groups, what we're trying to do is get customers not to tell you what you need to fix, what's wrong with your sector, etc. You're trying to get them to remove the shackles and reimagine what great would look like from their perspective. And then to really capture that in a set of attributes of the ideal company. Short statements that capture the things that are important to them, that describe what a great company would look like. This is the basic output that you get from these focus groups. And typically, I find that once you've grouped all of the output together into clusters, you get around 20 or so individual statements defining the attributes of the ideal company. You'll also find, as you write them down, that there'll be really, really obvious things. And you'll also find that you get a mix of very basic functional things, but also some more emotional things. So you get basic things like they solve my problems quickly and efficiently, through slightly more value-based things like they never make promises they can't keep, to much more human aspects like they speak in my language and treat me the way I want to be treated. It's always fascinating to see that whilst the attributes can appear to be incredibly obvious common sense things, so many businesses I've worked with really struggle to be able to say that they're actually delivering on most or even any of them. So we've gone through our focus groups, we've got our attributes of the ideal company, and the next step is to take these results to quantitative research. This is basically a simple online survey across a larger sample of the target market to rank the attributes in order of importance to the segments, as well as to evaluate how well our company and our main competitors are performing against each attribute, and finally, to identify those attributes that are highly correlated with loyalty. So you can start to get a very clear picture of what is the most important thing to customers. And again, you often find that the results are surprising, particularly to the management teams. To go back to the telecoms example, almost all management teams believe that price and network quality will be firmly at the top of the list. And in fact, they typically come out kind of halfway down the list. And it's usually the slightly more intangible things around respect for customers, fairness, helpfulness, these sorts of slightly more emotional aspects that come out at the top of the list. So you can start to get some key themes, key groupings that emerge from the data, things like straightforwardness and transparency, flexibility, simplicity, dependability, and so on. The key point here is that while these are recognizable ideas to any business, they're not simply plucked out of the air or invented in some off-site workshop. They're driven by customers and backed up by hard data. You also get a clear picture of where you and your competition stand against these attributes. What's the gap between where you are and where customers want you to be, and also between you and your competitors? What are the core strengths and weaknesses of each of the players in the market? So this research becomes the kind of bedrock of what we're going to be using to start to develop the idea of what we should be for our customers, because they're telling us very clearly what the ideal looks like. And this should be our primary input in constructing the model of what we want to be going forward. But it's not the only input. There are three other dimensions that we also need to take into account. The first of these other dimensions is really, really critical. We need to get an understanding of our own culture, our DNA as an organization. We mentioned earlier that in order to be really successful, you need to have a match between what you stand for your customers and what you live and breathe internally day in, day out. So the first step in here is to understand what is your current DNA, what is your current culture, what are the things that you do really well as a business, what are the things that come naturally to you that you can leverage and build on, and equally, what are the things that are blocking you and need to be corrected. Do you have a highly empowered culture, in which case empowering customers to make their own choices will come naturally? Or are you a kind of command and control type organization that will never naturally give customers freedom? Or are you a culture that's naturally open and transparent, so honesty with customers will be second nature? Or are you more a need-to-know type business that would struggle with telling customers the whole truth? So we've got an understanding of what matters to customers. We've got a sense of who we are as a culture. The third dimension is a picture of the competitive landscape. What are our competitors' strengths and weaknesses? We can get this from our earlier quantitative survey, as well as a sense of their brand positioning and personalities. We can get this from a kind of brand personification exercise that I sometimes do as part of the ideal company focus groups. You know, the sort of thing. If company X was a person, what kind of person would they be? Male or female, young or old, and so on. Anecdotally, I remember doing this exercise for a client that, again, I won't name, and rather depressingly, every single person gave pretty much the exact same description. They were a greedy old man who's only interested in money. It was a tough message to play back internally. So this sort of competitor analysis will show us where the white space is from a positioning point of view, and we can make sure the personality we adopt won't overlap with any of our competition. The final aspect that we need to take into account is the kind of historical experience that you've been delivering to customers, what they know you for now. Because if you're designing what you're going to be standing for going forward, you need to be cognizant of where you've come from. You need to know what people think about you. So if you've historically been a very commercially aggressive organization that's had a lot of kind of special offers and there's a perception of manipulating customers through price, then to take a positioning going forward all around fairness and transparency and honesty would be a major leap. Even if that's what customers value most, you've still got to be cognizant that if you are going to take that positioning, you're going to have to unwind an awful lot of preconceived ideas in the customer mind. And you have to think very carefully about the implications of going down that road. So the idea here is that we're trying to bring together a kind of 360 view of everything. What matters most to your target customers and how that translates into what the ideal company would look like. You're looking at your own DNA, what you're naturally good at, and what the blocks are that you need to remove. You're looking at your competitors and where the white space is in the market from a positioning perspective. And you're looking at your historical delivery of experience to customers. And you're bringing all of that together. And what we're trying to do here is to allow a story, a positioning from those four dimensions to emerge. Now, I have to confess here that it's really difficult to codify the process of the answer emerging from the data. It does sit somewhere in the hinterland between science and creativity. The only thing I can say is that in my experience, once I've waded around in all of the data, internalized it, and become fully immersed in what it all means, then almost every time the answer just leaps out at you. And you get this kind of knowing that you've hit the right answer, that everything fits, that you've found the gold. So what does this answer look like? What is it we get out of all this research and analysis? The first thing is our core customer principles. We're distilling all of that data down into a set of principles that we want to be known for in the marketplace, what we stand for. These are the 3 or 4 attitudes, personality traits, values that we want customers to be able to see in us every time they touch us, every time they have any kind of interaction with us. They need to be able to feel these things being reflected back to them. Put very simply, these are the things that are the answer to the basic question of, I love this company because. I love this company because they keep everything really simple. It's zero effort. They know me and respect what I want. They play fair, these sorts of things. We're trying to be very, very clear on what it is that makes us special. What are the things that we stand for that customers will see in us and they will love about us? It's worth making the point that by boiling it down to these customer principles, we're also implicitly saying what we're not standing for as well. A classic example of this might be the issue of innovation. Loads of companies I've worked with want to see themselves as really innovative, on the cutting edge of technology and so on. But in actual fact, by going through this exercise, they realize that customers really don't value that. And they have to explicitly let go of that innovative technology positioning, usually in favor of something much more human. A classic example of this was the mobile operator I worked with. Their positioning was all about latest technology, best network, and so on. But when we did the focus group with customers, they never even mentioned technology, not even once. It was not something that was important to them. So we ended up with a set of principles that were much more focused on dependability, understanding and respect for customers, and serving with style. Then the second element that layers on top of these principles and provides a foundation, a meaning for it all, is your customer purpose. Why you exist for customers. What is your core belief as a business? It's really important to articulate this because being clear on your why is the essential start point for everything. I don't want to get all Golden Circle and Simon Sinek here. There's more than enough material out there on this topic. But I think the key message here is that this is a perfect way into that question because it's grounded in what customers value. It is customers leading you to purpose, not the other way around. And a clear sense of purpose really can change everything. Maybe a few examples here might bring this to life. I worked with a bank in Brazil that was in the process of transforming from a consumer credit business to a full-service bank. What emerged from the customer research was the need customers had to have somebody on their side in the day-to-day financial struggles of life. And it led us to adopting a core belief that money should not be a source of worry, and a core purpose to make light of managing money. Similarly, the mobile operator that we talked about before, that was all about best network and technology, realized that their real purpose was not to run a network, but to enable customers to share experiences with people they cared about. We could talk about each of these examples forever, but the key message here is that by realizing their purpose, it fundamentally changed the way they thought about everything, from the products and solutions they designed to what they talked to customers about and how they communicated with them. So with our customer purpose and our principles clear, it's often a great way to encapsulate this by articulating it in a kind of customer manifesto, a simple summary of what you believe in, how you deliver it, and in the end, why you exist. But a word of caution here. It's really tempting to believe that when you get to this point, it's all done. You've come through your midlife crisis, you've found meaning, you've found the answer, and that somehow this new vision will magically come to life. There's a temptation to start putting up posters of the manifesto all around the office, put your principles on your corporate screensavers, to run training courses, to brainwash your people into believing, and so on. But the reality is that this is just the start. To make it a reality, you really have to do the work. And we're talking about a fundamental shift here, so it's going to be a lot of work. So in the next episode, what we're going to be talking about is how you take that fundamental positioning, that foundation, and turn it into an actual reality on the ground for customers. What do you need to do to operationalize that, to make it a living, breathing experience? What's the mechanical process for delivering that? So many thanks for listening, and hope to see you soon.